good morning or good afternoon or good evening wherever you are in the world. Thank you to eXp Realty for sponsoring today's episode. Talent Finders would like to welcome entrepreneur Kate Greer all the way out of San Francisco. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's lovely to be here with you today.
So I'd like to congratulate you on all your achievements. Can you please share with us how your entrepreneurial journey started?
Sure. It's funny. It still doesn't feel right to call myself an entrepreneur. And, I didn't start out life being entrepreneurial. My father was an insurance lawyer. My mother was a music teacher, and we were very sort of risk-averse people who played within the lines. But it's funny, my whole life, my soul has been longing for my own container. And
Yes.
I've tried to, fit into other people's containers, and I've been very successful at doing that. But my soul's longing has always been to create my own. And so after, decades of working in Silicon Valley and making other people's dreams come true, I finally took the plunge really fully last year, at the beginning of the year that was 2020, into launching Contagious Vulnerability into the world.
Yes, so that leads me into the next question. So you're obviously known for, starting Contagious Vulnerability and a mindfulness practice. So can you share with us more about this with the audience that don't know exactly what it is that you do?
Of course. So going back a little bit, it was when I turned 50 in 2016, where I really started wanting to do more than things I love with people I love, which had been kind of the filter for my professional journey up until that point. And I really wanted to have an impact that mattered to me. And I think a lot of folks at that inflection point in their lives start really thinking about the legacy they want to leave and really wanting to be more impact driven. And I was like that, and I went off to coaching school, and I really didn't feel like the coaching, the definition of a coach really fit me fully. So I really spent the next 5 years kind of making it my own and really coming up with this idea of contagious vulnerability. But contagious vulnerability started in the coaching experience, in the coaching school, during a values and purpose workshop. I was asked what was the impact I wanted to have on the world, and what was I being or doing to have that impact. And the impact I wanted to have was to inspire greater self-love through curious exploration and an embracing of one's perfect imperfections. Yes. And the word "I am contagious vulnerability" kind of came out of me at that moment. And I've really spent the last 5 years kind of living into what exactly that is. And so initially it was a series of workshops. It actually was a workshop I hosted on the land that I steward. It was a group experience to inspire basically courageous conversations and a willingness to give voice to what you're carrying, what's alive for you in the moment. And then over the course of last year in 2020, I started really diving into, okay, well, how do I help bring this to life for others in the world? How do I help people understand what it was? And honestly, I was trying to understand fully what it was. Yes. And so over the course of last year, I wrote an article a week, basically giving voice to my experience of transformation live as it was happening. It started well before the pandemic hit. But then all of a sudden, everybody else joined me in transformation, all of us, all at once. Yes. And so, from the beginning, it was always, I think a lot of folks on these journeys of self-discovery can be quite self-absorbed. And for me, it's always been about metabolizing my own experience, making meaning of it for myself, with an eye towards pulling out universal themes and powerful questions that can be of service to others on their own journeys of becoming. And so out of that came, this idea of contagious vulnerability as a mindfulness practice for mental wellness. And what that means is I'm very clear that I'm not a therapist. A lot of my group experiences are kind of group therapy adjacent. I'm more than a coach in the sense that I am very comfortable navigating the emotions that come up during people's journeys of transformation and becoming. But I'm also not here to ask you about your mother. And I believe, because of witnessing my own mother's 20-year battle with depression that ended in her suicide 13 years ago, I recognized what happens if you are not able to give voice to what you're carrying inside, and that there's a huge power for an individual to have the courage to speak what's alive for them in the presence of others, in the presence of collective witnessing, deep listening, with the eye towards having powerful reflections or celebration or other responses that can be deeply therapeutic and can create a sense of belonging and a sense of everything is actually okay as it is. That I'm actually more normal than I think in my feelings of not being normal.
Exactly. So within that, what have been some of your biggest lessons and learnings within your career?
Well, as a woman of 55, I think you can always be more, in the sense, not being it all and having it all and doing it all. I'm not that kind of person. I really have come to a place of very grounded expansion. And so I think at this stage in my life, and what I try to invite my clients to find in themselves is a sense, I use a lot of nautical metaphors. It's like finding your keel. What is grounding for you, no matter how turbulent the world gets, no matter how much change is swirling around you? What is the essential truth of you that I call them your essential ingredients? What are those essential things that without which you wouldn't feel like yourself? Now, you can take those essential ingredients and express them in as many ways as the people on Chopped can make dishes out of 5 ingredients, right? Like you can spend your life reimagining yourself. And I guess for me, I don't look at personal growth as an onion that has a finite set of layers. I look at personal development as a space of grounded expansion, that I and you are multiverses of potential. We have every single Kate and every single Karen that has ever existed is still alive in us. They may not be leading, but they're ingredients, right? They've made us who we are. And so I don't have any regrets, because everything that's happened to me is why I'm this person having this conversation with you in this moment. And I invite my clients to try to find a way of, it's holistic. It's really an integrative. It's a sense of mining for your ingredients, finding all your pieces and your fragments, and then weaving them together to make this beautiful alchemy that is generative, that is nourishing, and that is enlivening. Because to me, if you're always exploring and you're always curious, that's the best, the highest state of aliveness that I think one can be in.
Yes, absolutely. So before you embarked on your entrepreneurial journey, you also worked in corporate in Silicon Valley, which is obviously highly competitive. So can you share with us more about this? And what was that like for you? And what made you transition into mental wellness and the health space and into the space that you're in now?
Yeah, well, my roots before going into Silicon Valley were in organizational behavior. So essentially, I've always been fascinated by group dynamics and human behavior. And I, as many children who came of age in the 80s, I thought corporate was the place to go. Back then, HR was kind of a lesser kind of thing. It wasn't, you didn't have chief heart officers. HR was sort of people taking care of the things in the organization that nobody wanted to take care of. And so I spent decades in Silicon Valley leading front-end design and development. I was not an engineer or designer, but I was somebody who was very adept at bringing together these diverse skill sets that are in engineers, designers, MBAs, QA people. I mean, it takes a lot of different skills and personalities to make software and to make websites. And I was very good at harmonizing them with an eye towards producing experiences that delighted customers, but also met our business goals, right? So I wasn't an idealistic designer, nor was I purely about getting the job done at any cost. I really, I practice it as an art form. And then at a certain point, as I said, I turned 50, and I really felt like I really wanted to have impacts that mattered to me. I also think Silicon Valley got to be very intense, and over time it started being less about creating something from nothing. I mean, I joined one of the earliest PDA companies in '93. They were trying to build the iPhone in 1993, which was obviously did not work. But what was interesting about it was that we were creating something out of nothing. The same was true when I went to Webcrawler and then to Excite, where we were creating web portals that didn't exist before Google came and disrupted us. And so what I witnessed on that journey, as you said, it's incredibly competitive, not just organization to organization, but also individual to individual. And there's a lot of sort of politics, which I never felt, politics always hurt my heart. And I think as a person who cares deeply about people, and I bring my heart to everything I do, I don't thrive in environments where politics is at work. And I really try to be a person that celebrates everyone on the team and really recognizes the importance of everyone on the team thriving. And I've kind of translated that into a practice of doing that in group experiences that I now host on Clubhouse and on Zoom. At some point, I'm sure we will go back to hosting live. I do it for conferences, you know, as sort of a person helping to bring greater authenticity and more courageous conversations to organizations or gatherings of people. I'm very good at, you know, at the beginning or end of an experience, you know, of a conference, of helping people sort of integrate what they learned and share their experiences. So I've become quite a heartful host and facilitator. And I think what has been pulling me along was just that Silicon Valley just stopped resonating. And I started to recognize that if I can make these other people's audacious dreams come true, their BHAGs, as they call them, the big, hairy, audacious goals, if I could look at any founder with this crazy idea and say, I'll help you do that, why was I not doing that for myself? And so finally, you know, I kept trying to fit into somebody else's container, and I finally was presented, but with this, one of the legends of organizational theory, this guy named Bob Waterman, who wrote In Search of Excellence with Tom Peters at McKinsey. And he was listening to me tell him about my latest container that I was trying to fit in that was so aligned, and it was everything I ever wanted. And he looked at me and he said, in 10 years, what will you regret not having done if you're wildly successful on this path? And I realized in that moment that I would regret spending the next 10 years building somebody else's dream instead of my own. Absolutely. And that's when I took the leap. And I'm sure that a lot of your audience can relate with that. You know, it's you always have this urge and like, why not leap? Why not now?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're also a writer. Was this something that was organic for you? And can you share with us more about that? Or was it quite a challenge? With some people, writing is natural, and other people, it's a real challenge.
I love words. I love to play with words. I find writing to be one of the most divine experiences. It's so funny when I read about writers who are in pain when they write. I just don't relate to that at all. And yet, you know, it's funny because as a child, I was a mathlete. I was a math science nerd, right? I loved everything with right answers. I was a pleaser. I was a perfectionist, just like a mini version of my mother. But then in witnessing her journey, I think I recognized the dangers of perfectionism and pleasing others and not really being aware of your own needs. But getting back to the writing, you know, in my earliest jobs, I actually found that I was super creative in writing emails and memos before we had emails, because I recognized that if I was entertaining and creative with the way I expressed myself, that people would actually read them. So as a producer and product manager in Silicon Valley, I would write my emails in a very entertaining style while being super clear. So I was a very clear communicator that was very action oriented, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure people were having fun and enjoying themselves. And I would have never called myself a writer back then. But what it turned out, if I look back on my journey in Silicon Valley, I wrote everything. I wrote all the copy. I wrote the press releases. I wrote the help text. I wrote, you name it, I wrote it. And I got very good at fitting in very few characters, the essential energy of something that I was trying to express. And so I also recognized through a friend who was a marketing genius, if I really wanted to get contagious vulnerability out in the world, I needed to figure out how to create some sort of, I thought leadership sounds so egotistical, but I had to create a sort of a sense of what it was. And my friend called it the education layer in the marketplace, right? You don't launch a marketing campaign without really having a foundation that helps your customer understand what you are and who you are. And so that was the impetus for me to start writing, was to sort of give voice to, okay, what does it mean to be a transformation agent? What does contagious vulnerability mean? Who am I? And why am I speaking about this? And I think also, what personal experiences do I have that are relevant to this offering? Because unlike therapists and coaches, I've actually, a lot of people, have lots of tools and frameworks. I have incredible life experiences. I've navigated so much change, and I have been pivoting and reinventing and reimagining and reframing myself from birth, basically, despite not having been set up to be that person. But the person you see, I mean, I was an introverted, shy, bookish girl when I was little, and I chose at some point to be an extrovert. I chose to do the work and be awkward and go through that journey to become more of what I wanted to be. And I've applied that same, like, if I envy something, I ask myself, am I willing to do the work and be awkward to be that? Or am I going to let that go? Because I find, envy isn't useful unless it's a catalyst for becoming, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Otherwise, it'll eat you alive.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I answered your question there.
No, yeah, you did. But I also think that the older you get, the less you care about or the less you envy. I mean, I've just kind of like gone through this process myself and realized, there's so much jealousy and envy and imposter syndrome and all of this stuff. But I've just gotten to a place within myself where I'm not interested really anymore. Like, I don't really care who has what. I just need to navigate my own journey. So
exactly. Well, and there's a great quote by Theodore Roosevelt that comparison is the thief of joy.
Yes.
And I find that, it's so true, because sometimes you're a joy thief. I actually wrote a piece called The Joy Thief, which you can find on Medium. It's actually, sometimes I'm stealing my own joy in comparison to myself, right? Like I'm a lesser version of myself in some concept. And so I really try to embrace who I am and what I am today. And I really try to look at everything that I'm experiencing, all the energy I'm feeling inside and outside of me. I look at it as energy for me to work with, as if it's material, right? That it's, the universe has provided me with a learning opportunity in every single instance, in the dynamic between you and I, and the dynamic between me and myself, me and my environment. All of those energies are there as material for me to engage with, to say, how can I learn from this moment? What is this here for? How can I use this to advance my soul's journey?
Absolutely. So that leads me to obviously wanting to talk around leadership or a lack of leadership. As you have led over 2 decades of leading transformation of products and services, organizations and individuals in Silicon Valley. So what would you say makes your leadership style different? And what do you believe needs to change on a global and organizational and entrepreneurial level to change the current narrative? And can you give us any examples? I know that's a lot, but
I love the question.
Lack of leadership, and we're just seeing it even now in this pandemic. I think it's becoming more exposed than it ever has.
Absolutely. Well, I wrote a piece last year called Take Me to Your Leader. And really what I observed and have been observing for quite some time now is leadership is changing. This is a good thing, right? And I think people are bringing more heart and humanity to the workplace. And this is where courageous conversations, which is another word for vulnerability and authenticity, I think that's coming into play. I really want to see more diversity, not just as a checkbox of something we have to do by law, but as a recognition that heterogeneity is strength, right?
Yes.
Diversity is strength. If you look at an ecosystem, ecosystems thrive through heterogeneity and through balances between disparate energies. Now, it's more challenging to manage than sort of command and control monocultures, but it's so much richer and more sustainable and more resilient to change than very tightly constructed monocultures. So, I've had I studied organizational behavior. I've been in organizations since I was a small child. I mean, I think my first job in a corporation was when I was 13 or 14, and I used to go to my dad's law firm and help him alphabetize his legal documents. So I started even earlier than that. And, everything felt very structured. And when I got to Silicon Valley, we those structures were breaking down. I mean, they always talked about flat hierarchies, and yet we had all these hierarchies, right? And so I think we're moving to a world where it's more about servant leadership and I would call it service leadership, because servant, master servant is just such a loaded concept. But I think I am a person who is deeply of service, and I really am grateful to both of my parents for modeling how to be of service. In my mother's case, she modeled how to be of service in a way that was too extreme, and she wasn't able to take care of herself. So I think, in answer to your question, leaders really should come with an idea of being of service to and being in power with, rather than power over, and leadership as domination, leadership as command and control. And really what I find is that, you know, you're in these big meetings in Silicon Valley and you're talking about big data and Google Analytics and A/B testing and all of this. And yet the biggest source of data that is missing in the room, that is right there, is the data that exists inside of the somatic experience of every single person at that table. Yes, how does my stomach feel when I talk about that? How does my heart feel? Do I expand or contract when I hear what we're talking about? And I invite people to give voice to what they're experiencing. If I notice, you know, micro expressions on somebody's face, I will invite them to share what it is that is behind that expression. Not in a, you know, a prying way, but in a, hey, you know, all of this is relevant. All of this information is going to make us better as a team. And so my orientation from a leadership style is to bring my whole heart, is to be of service, is to really not just be about the mind, but also about the body, and to help people connect with themselves and each other in a much more authentic way. And I think lastly, the most important thing that I introduced in a team meeting I had yesterday, because I've joined a biotech company in addition to offering contagious vulnerability to the world, and I'm the resident humanist. I'm not a scientist. And so during our weekly team meeting, we usually just talk about what our accomplishments and priorities are, just to kind of get in sync every Monday. And at the end of ours yesterday, I invited celebration, because I don't think we stop and celebrate enough, especially with these sort of distributed organizational structures today, where it's hybrid or we're all remote, or, you know, there's all these different ways of engagement now. And so I think really finding ways to celebrate yourselves and each other. And it was funny to watch people. What was so beautiful about it was, like, it made them stop and recognize, wow, I did that. Oh, cool. And to be seen by your colleagues that way is really amazing. And so it created this chain of contagious celebration that was just, it transformed what was otherwise a sort of a weekly status meeting into something more.
Yes. That's amazing.
And it builds culture, right? It builds culture. Absolutely. It builds connective tissue between individuals. And because at the core, I think, getting back to your original question about leadership, is organization should be relational and not transactional, right? I think we approach each other transactionally, like, what can you do for me? I need to get this done. You know, this is a deadline. And really, I invite relational engagement at every level in every interaction.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I love that. So one of the many areas you specialize in is vulnerability. Why do you think that this is something that there is still a negative association with, or why is it still seen as a weakness? And do you believe that this is changing?
Well, I do believe it's changing, and I'm grateful to Brene Brown, because it was funny when I came up with the statement, I am contagious vulnerability. I hadn't really ever read Brene Brown, and yet when you say vulnerability, you think Brene Brown, and I'm super grateful to her, and I really love what she's doing around bravery and courageous conversations, which is essentially another way of saying vulnerability. It's having the courage to speak truth to something that you're experiencing, right, with another person. And so, you know, I think the reason vulnerability is viewed as a negative is first of all, that if you look in the dictionary, I mean, it basically means exposing yourself to harm. Now, for me, it means having the courage to be authentic. So it's incredibly brave. And, you know, I think Brene Brown is doing work with members of the military, because there's nothing more vulnerable than being a member of the military and going out and exposing yourself to harm in that way. And yet we view these beings as heroes and as courageous individuals. And I would argue that all of us as humans are incredibly courageous, because we're each having our own experience, even collectively, and having the courage to express your own unique point of view and to reciprocally be interested and curious about someone else's unique point of view. And I think that's the key, because there's a lot of people talking at each other and trying to get their own personal view across. And I'm deeply curious to know more about your experience, because as intuitive as I am, I assume in any conversation I don't know anything, right? I go in not knowing, in a posture of humility, and really wanting the other person to tell me what are they experiencing in their own words.
Yes, absolutely. So in that, what would you say some of your biggest career highlights have been? And you probably had multiple, but what's the one that really stands out for you?
Well, it used to be that I was the person who launched the first personalized start page on the internet.
Wow, okay.
But, you know, I mean, I think one of my career highlights was just proving to everyone that I could do something that they said I couldn't do. Because back in '92, when I joined, you know, started looking for jobs in Silicon Valley, I was not an engineer. And back then it was engineering for engineers, and consumer tech wasn't really existent. And so I sort of talked my way in, and did jobs along the periphery that, you know, that were aligned with skills that I did have. So writing documentation, and I learned how to be a very good quality assurance tester. And, you know, I sort of became a producer, and gradually over time, I made myself essential, and I got my foot in the door, and I figured out how to learn the language. And I'm doing it again at 55 in biotech. You know, when you walk into a technology environment or a biotech environment, at least for me as a non-scientist and a non-engineer, everything feels like Greek, and you don't understand a word of it, and it's going by really fast, and everybody assumes a lot of facts not in evidence for you, right? And so over time, you start recognizing words, you start understanding concepts, and pretty soon you understand, but you can't speak. And then once you reach full fluency, you're able to not only understand, but you're also able to speak back and communicate. So I feel like, you know, the highlight of my career has really been to get to a point where I come to work in all that I do, whether it's as a vulnerability doula, or as a host of Contagious Vulnerability, as a convener, or as the head of experience for a biotech company. I bring my whole self to work, and I am unabashedly, unashamedly, fully myself, and I value that. And I don't sit there and go, oh, I wish I were more like them. I use those cues of, wow, look at that person and what they're doing. That's a cue, a catalyst for me to study more, to learn more, but not to try to be them, but to follow my own curiosity and to build more skills. So I think one of the biggest accomplishments in this moment is 55. I feel more alive than I've ever felt, and I feel more expansive and creative and effective in my job, and so much calmer. Like I sleep better. I don't stress about things. I don't have a narrative going on in my head saying you're not enough, you're not this, you're not that.
Yeah, it's amazing. So now that we in this pandemic, obviously, which has obviously turned our worlds inside out and upside down, and so much has obviously happened through this pandemic, which has been amplified. I believe we're heading in that direction, but the pandemic has accelerated it both in a good and bad way, and we've obviously had many life lessons for all of us that has occurred. So what do you personally see and believe this experience has taught you? And how have you had to adapt? And can you give us any examples?
Yeah, well, I mean, I said this in a piece I wrote last year. I feel like the pandemic has given us a master class in impermanence and non-attachment, right? And the recognition that none of us are in control of anything.
No.
But as Viktor Frankl said, you don't control, paraphrase, you don't control what happens to you, but you control your responses.
Yes,
and, you know, he was always so inspiring to me, because if somebody can go through the horrific experience of the Holocaust, which is beyond anything we're seeing today, we're seeing a lot of terrible things happening today, and I don't want to minimize any of them. Right? To have lived through, from his perspective, that experience, and to come out of it with the philosophy and the heart and the spirit that he had, is inspiring to all of us to dig deep and to say, you know, how can I show up fully in this moment? How can I be of service in this moment? Because that's why I believe my soul is here. I
Yes.
believe I chose, my soul on some level chose this time to incarnate. So everything I signed up for is part of the journey. And so I think the lesson to me is giving yourself agency, though. People talk about nudges from the universe or invitations from the divine or whatever you want to call it, or just opportunities. You can say no. You can say yes, but not now. You can say full body yes. Give yourself agency. So I have given myself a lot of agency that empowers me to not be buffeted around by what's going on. And I think the biggest lesson is to be grounded and centered in yourself without being rigid, right? So know who you are, know your essential ingredients, but always have an eye towards what else can I do with these, or how do I adapt these ingredients to a new context? I have been very, very effective throughout my career at taking my core skills and figuring out how to reframe, reapply, reimagine them in different contexts to continue to be of service and to continue to adapt. And I think, this to me, this pandemic was a test, honestly, one which we largely failed initially, but which I think we have had some great learnings from and incredible things happen as a result of. And my sense, though, is that the world is not going to get less chaotic. It is likely to get more chaotic. And so my clients come to me in their own vulnerability, but with a collective vulnerability that is pretty intense, and I think will get more intense. So I'm trying to help people sort of find their grounded center and find their essential ingredients and reimagine and have new perspectives and see them in different ways to figure out how to continually evolve what their soul's longings are and to apply it to what's right in front of them, right? And so I think adaptability and resilience are going to be two of the most powerful skills that you need for the future.
Yes.
And when I say resilience, I don't mean just sort of stoicism or the ability to bear down and bear whatever's going on. I mean resilience that comes from being able to process and be with the emotions that come up along the journey, not just with yourself and a therapist, but really with others, to really have deeper, more authentic conversations with each other, having courageous conversations, because to me that helps us heal diseases of disconnection. And those are mental health illness, chemical addiction, overconsumption, shopping addictions, gambling. I mean, you've seen diseases of disconnection all over the place. And it means that we're out of sync with ourselves. We're not connected to ourselves. We're not connected to each other, and we're not connected to the planet. And so my invitation through these practices of working with people as their vulnerability doula, or convening people in contagious vulnerability experiences, is come and experience the power of authenticity. Come experience the benefits of having the courage to give voice to your personal experience, to actually dig deep and know what it is, instead of being up in your head. Really like tune into the signals in your body and integrate those two sources of wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you believe that there's been a certain level of consciousness that have been awakened within people? And what shifts do you see globally and energetically changing?
Yeah, so I'm not there currently, but I live in Northern California, and in a place that I jokingly call Wooville. But there's a lot of people that fall into the category of woo, and I'm as a former New Yorker, I'm a practical woo, right? So,
Yes.
but to me, it's sad that we call it woo, because it's really heart, right?
Oh,
So
100%.
I think as a species, we somehow have put heart into a category that often has been associated with women and often has not been valued by our economy and our culture and taken for granted. So the caring economy is one that is largely unpaid and taken for granted and experiences a great deal of burnout. But so I have seen more people in more contexts awakening to the power of the heart. I have this dear friend who is the chief heart officer of VaynerMedia, a woman by the name of Claude Silver, who's one of the most divine humans I know. And the fact that somebody like Gary Vaynerchuk, who is, what you see is what you get with him. He is exactly as he is. He's the yang to her yin, and yet he deeply respects her and has empowered her to be his equal and to hold that organization in a very courageous and authentic but heartful space of potential. And so I think more and more companies are recognizing that heart is not a nice to have, that,
It's
that
essential.
values, yeah, and that values and purpose can't just be posters on the wall. If you awaken people in an organization through a workshop and then don't actually live into those values and help people practice them and develop practices to embody them, then you might as well have not awakened them at all. Because you go off to a workshop about purpose and then you go back and you're sent back to your cube and you're told to do the exact same thing, but now do it with purpose. It doesn't work, right?
Yeah,
So
there's a serious disconnect.
yeah. And so I think in our world today, I find more and more people outside of the sort of the spiritual hippie zones, people in mainstream organizations that are recognizing the importance of bringing the human back in human resources, bringing your humanity to work. And to also, I hope I'm seeing a shift from a consumption and extraction economy where we are basically producing to consume and consuming to produce, and where organizations have told us to bring all of ourselves to work because they want to extract every last bit of value out of us in a very sort of
Exploitive.
it's exploitive, and it's also burns people out, and it's finite, right? So I think we're moving to a more regenerative leadership model. We're moving to a model that's more of stewardship of ourselves, of each other, and of the planet. Because out of that, I believe, you look at nature, ecosystems are regenerative and resilient. And every organism in them thrives and keeps in balance all the disparate entities and energies. And so I look to those models for the future. And I think, in answer to your question, I'm excited to say there's a lot of awakening, but there's also a lot of people who are scared, and you cannot underestimate the power of fear to cause people to do a lot of things that are really quite toxic and harmful to themselves and each other. And we're seeing that in the polarization and the toxic politics and the weaponization
and the divisiveness. The divisiveness.
Yeah, that comes from pain to me. Like, to me, I look at that and I see wounds that people are covering up. And so never underestimate the power of a wounded creature to lash out and attack.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
So that leads me to the final question. What are the 3 key pieces of advice you would give to other entrepreneurs? And what legacy would you like to leave, or how would you like to be remembered? Because some people don't like the word legacy. So
well, I think I'll answer the last one first. I think my legacy is that I love, therefore I am, and that I was of service. Really, those are, I deeply, and I am here to be of service. I am here to bring my whole heart to everything I do and to everyone I do. And I embody my middle name of Joy, not in the toxic positivity sense of the word, but in the more eudaimonia, wellness of spirit sense of the word. So that is the legacy, is really leaving things and people better off than I found them, and making sure that the energetic imprint that I leave on the planet and on everyone that I've touched in my lifetime is one that came from my heart, and that is a loving and curious one. I think the piece of advice for entrepreneurs that I would have is be yourself. I see a lot of entrepreneurs chasing tipping points, or trying to be the next TikTok, or trying to be somebody else. And honestly, you can't, even Malcolm Gladwell says, you can't engineer a tipping point, they just happen. So really trust your gut and really listen to your inner guidance, and but be willing to continually adapt and evolve your essential ingredients as a person and as a business to meet the opportunities and currents of energy that are around you. So I use surfing metaphors for life. You can go on contagiousvulnerability.medium.com and read a lot of pieces that I've written about this. But life is like surfing, in that it's one part you and your desire, and another part the universe and the currents of energy and opportunity, the waves of energy and opportunity that are around you. And you cannot make a wave. So if you have a great business idea and the world is not giving you momentum to work with, you are not going to be successful, or it's going to be a whole lot harder.
Yeah.
I also see people fighting against the tides, trying to do something even though everything in their lives is telling them not to. I also see entrepreneurs that are having massive FOMO, and that's like trying to surf on a wave while looking over your shoulder to see if the next wave is better. My sense is, what is the wave right here, right now? First of all, what is my North Star? What am I really wanting to be on a very high level? And then what wave or current of opportunity can I work with in this moment to move towards that goal? And I assume that there is no perfect wave. That is, my whole life is going to be a series of waves of opportunity. There are going to be times where nothing is happening, when there are absolutely no waves to work with. And then I have to figure out how to build my skills, and maybe I restore and I do other things during that time, so that I'm ready the next time there's a wave to engage with. And I really, I advise my clients of this, is really to look around you and say, what wave of opportunity is here now? Don't just sit on the sidelines and wait for the perfect wave, because if you get a great wave and you haven't done anything up until that point, you're not going to be in shape enough to interact with it. So treat everything as a practice. Really, I think my mantra is, you build practices to live into your intention. And so how, as an organization, do you build practices to live into your values, to live into your mission, to realize it on a daily basis, and to inspire that in others? And I think the last thing I will say is just the courage to be authentic, the courage to be, to communicate authentically with each other. And underneath that, this is not radical candor, which tends to be more radical and not very heartful. I really believe that contagious vulnerability is rooted in a loving curiosity about oneself and each other, and really a willingness to learn things and to go in and discover, not to assume anything.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Kate. It's been amazing. So if people wish to connect with you, what are the best platforms to do so?
Sure. Well, as I said, you can read the whole series I wrote last year on contagiousvulnerability.medium.com. You can also engage with me on my website, which is contagiousvulnerability.com. That's probably the best place. And I love curious conversations, so I'm always happy to schedule a call with people, a discovery call, to just have a curious conversation and see what we can learn from each other.
Well, thank you so much, Kate, and hopefully we can have you back in the future to see where you are in your journey.
I would love that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to connect today. It was lovely, lovely speaking with you and your audience.
Thank you.